So I'm just gonna lay it all out there for you guys. This is a story for entertainment purposes only. Today, I want to talk about how I messed up big time because I was too greedy and always wanting something better. Hopefully, my story will make you think about appreciating what you have and not always looking for more. I'm a 26-year-old chick who was married to my ex, a 28-year-old dude, for 2 years. We got hitched right after we finished college, where we met through some mutual friends even though we were studying different stuff. But hey, our bond grew strong. We started dating and ended up deciding to tie the knot. At first, we were just seeing where things would go, but as we spent more time together, our love grew stronger and marriage seemed like the natural next step. Our early married life was pretty smooth sailing. My ex landed a well-paying job in a big company right out of school, while I took on the role of a stay-at-home spouse. We were young and felt like we could take on anything together. I had promised to be there for him as he pursued his goals. Me and my ex had big career goals and thought we could conquer anything life threw at us. His job demanded long hours and he was dead set on making a name for himself. I tried to be supportive at first, but I sucked at it. While he was working late, I found myself mindlessly scrolling through Instagram, seeing people my age having a blast with their partners, going on trips and having fun. Meanwhile, I was stuck at home in the kitchen, waiting for my husband to come back. It was a real bummer. It started getting to me, so I told my ex-husband we should take a break and go on a vacation. But he kept putting it off, saying he had too many things to take care of. He promised to work hard to make us financially secure. We had a nice house, but we were still in debt and living a pretty average life. My ex-husband always wanted to be rich and successful, a dream he talked about since college. At first, I thought my love for him would make everything work out. I thought I could ride along with his dreams and be part of his journey to live the life he wanted. I imagined we'd live the high life together, but boy was I wrong. We had just graduated from college and were trying to make something of ourselves, but all our friends were out there living it up, posting their fun times on social media. I couldn't help but feel jealous of their carefree lives. Even though I tried to push those feelings down, it started affecting our marriage. Because of all this drama, my ex-husband would always come home late from work. I'd start spilling all the gossip I saw on social media about our friends and other stuff, and his reaction was always the same. He'd either ignore me or just give a short, "Oh, okay" response. It pissed me off and we'd end up arguing, especially when he was already tired. These fights would make us not talk to each other for days, but eventually we'd start chatting again once we cooled off. I just felt like he didn't get it. I was doing a lot for him, making sacrifices and all, and I just wanted some recognition and appreciation. So I brought it up during one of our fights, which pissed him off. He tried to explain that he did see my efforts, but he reminded me that everything he was doing was for our future. Even though I didn't like all the arguments we were having, I felt stuck and frustrated in our marriage and at home. Eventually, me and my ex-husband started growing apart. Looking back, I see that I played a part in that distance, but at the time, I didn't realize it. I was mainly pissed at him for not trying to fix the distance between us. Every time I called him out on his changes after we got married, he would lose his shit and storm out of the house, slamming the door behind him in a rage. Our talks were pretty much just about chores and stuff that needed to be done around the house. I was getting more and more annoyed because I felt like I was putting in all this work for him to succeed, but we were still not happy together. Days went by with us barely talking to each other. I was really hoping he would finally talk to me, and then out of the blue, he started a conversation during dinner. He brought up a work thing, like an office party or something, and said he wanted us to go together. He had a smile on his face, and I smiled back. I was so excited about going to a party, even if it was for his job. On the day of the event, I went to get my hair and nails done since they were way overdue. I got all dressed up and headed to the party with my husband, looking forward to a fun evening. Man, that party was lit. The venue was amazing, the decorations were on point. It was up on the rooftop of this fancy 5-star hotel with killer views of the city. I had a blast. It was the first time in forever that I actually had genuine fun. My husband introduced me to all his work buddies, who were all chill and cool. I even got to meet his boss for the first time. And let me tell you, I couldn't stop checking him out, he was so. There was this really hot guy, a bit older than my husband but definitely good looking. He smiled at me and jokingly asked my husband how he could stand being away from such a beautiful wife. His compliment surprised me and made me feel a bit guilty. I hadn't been very patient with my husband lately, so I promised myself to do better. We chatted with some other people and had drinks with his co-workers. Everything was going well, but there was something bothering me that I couldn't quite figure out. I totally caught his boss checking us out multiple times. Every time I glanced over, it felt like he was staring right at me. I shook off that weird feeling in my gut and tried to just have a good time at the party. It was actually a great night. We got back home around midnight, both wiped out and passed out quickly. The next day, my husband went back to his hectic work schedule. Even though I tried to be more patient, I still couldn't shake off my annoyance and unhappiness. But I managed to hold back from starting any arguments. So, me and him were just kind of chilling together, not really happy but at least being polite. Then one day, out of the blue, my husband tells me his boss is coming over for dinner that night. I was totally caught off guard, like I had no idea this was happening. He said it was just gonna be a casual hangout on a Friday night, and his boss wanted to try some homemade food in the city. He made sure to let me know it was cool if I didn't want to go along with it. Sure thing. He said he'd come home early to help out and grab any groceries I needed. So, I started cleaning up and getting dinner ready. When my husband came into the kitchen, he offered to help out and told me to go get ready while he took care of things. I agreed, knowing I couldn't meet his boss in sweatpants. I had a hard time deciding what to wear. It was weird, but I really wanted to impress my husband's boss, even though it didn't really make sense. So, I was feeling all prepped and ready, just putting on some light makeup before coming down the stairs. And guess what? When I got there, his boss was already waiting with a bunch of flowers in hand. As soon as he saw me, he got up and handed me the flowers. I gotta say, I was pretty impressed by his move. Not only was he good looking, but he had some charm to him too. I smiled at him, and he smiled back in a friendly way. But I couldn't help but wonder if there was a bit of flirting going on. We all sat down for dinner, and he kept on complimenting the food, which made my husband happy. Later on, he even asked me for my apple pie recipe because he said he loved it so much. I totally agreed and gave him my number so I could send it to him. The evening went well and he eventually left. My husband thanked me for organizing everything and we cleaned up before going to bed. He had an early day at work the next day, so he fell asleep fast. I stayed up scrolling through social media and got a text from his boss thanking me for the great dinner. My heart raced as I replied, but I ended the conversation quickly as I looked at my husband sleeping next to me. I felt guilty for having a crush. So, basically, I was thinking about my husband's boss and told myself it was just a stupid crush. Then, a few days later, while my husband was at work, his boss texted me saying he loves pie and asked for the recipe. I gave it to him and we kept chatting. It didn't seem weird at the time, just friendly banter with my husband's boss. We kept texting back and forth, he was funny and charming, and it felt nice to have those conversations since my husband and I weren't really talking like that anymore. Feeling a mix of emotions, but we kept going. My husband was so focused on his work that he didn't even realize I was no longer paying attention to him. Surprisingly, I didn't really care that he wasn't noticing me for once. I started texting his boss, especially when my husband was at work. It was confusing how my husband couldn't make time for me, but his boss could. I started questioning if I really meant anything to my husband. Days went by like this, and one day I went shopping at the mall. When I asked my husband for money When my husband left for work, he only gave me a little cash, saying we had to save because of our home debt and other expenses. It was annoying because every time I asked for something, he would bring up the need to save money. While I was at the mall, I ran into my husband's boss unexpectedly. I didn't tell him I was going to be there, so it was a surprise. He asked what I was shopping for, and I just casually said I was just browsing. He mentioned he was also bored and came to pass the time. Then he asked if so my friend wanted to chill and I was down, so we went to a bunch of stores together, just laughing and having a good time. While we were shopping, I saw this limited edition LV bag that I really liked, but it was way out of my price range. I just looked at it longingly before reluctantly putting it back on the shelf. But the boss saw me checking it out and told me to get it. I laughed and said I couldn't afford it, but he insisted on covering the cost. I was hesitant at first, but eventually gave in. So my friend got me this really pricey gift and I was hesitant at first, but then he just went ahead and bought it without a care in the world. He casually whipped out his card and dropped $3,000 on this bag like it was nothing. I was shocked by his generosity and how different our spending habits are. I grew up in a middle-class family where we always budgeted and saved, but he seems to have no problem splurging on expensive stuff. He handed me the bag as a thank you gift and I was just blown away. So we had dinner together earlier, and when I got home with the bag, I was still in shock. I've never been used to such fancy gifts before. My respect for him grew that day when I walked into our house with the bag. My husband noticed it and asked me about where I got it and how much it cost. Instead of being happy like I thought he would, he started interrogating me about the money I used to buy it. I was annoyed, so I decided not to tell him the truth and just said I got it at a thrift store for cheap. Babe, I got this designer bag for a steal. At first, my hubby was all like her, but then he was cool with it once I explained that it was a good deal considering our money situation. I just tossed it in the closet without any more chat about it. Hubby went back to his work and I started texting his boss to thank him for the sweet gift. We kept messaging each other all day and it felt like he got me more than my hubby does. Unlike my man, who's always busy and worried about money, his boss really gets me. So, this one time, the boss was trying to be all buddy-buddy with me, and I was like, why did I even go along with it? But he actually seemed interested in my hobbies and how I spend my time at home. Every time I told him something, he was all ears. Then, one Monday, my husband tells me his boss wants him to go to some work meeting out of town that night. So, he packs his stuff, heads to the airport, and leaves me alone for the night. I ended up in bed, texting his boss about my day and stuff. It's like we had some kind of connection by then. So, my buddy, he's 30, single, and living the high life in his fancy apartment. This guy's got a killer sense of humor, charm, and some serious appeal. He hit me up, saying we should grab dinner together since I was flying solo. I was all in, excited to see where he'd take me. The next day, my hubby called to check in and I reassured him that all was good at home. I thought about spilling the beans about dinner with his boss, but decided to keep it on the down low. I was worried he would hit me with a bunch of questions and I wasn't ready to answer them when I got all dolled up just as the doorbell rang and his boss was standing there waiting for me. We hopped in his car and headed to a fancy restaurant. Just like I thought, we were taken to a private booth for some privacy. I was feeling a bit weird about the whole situation, sitting in a posh restaurant in the city with my husband's boss. I decided not to overthink it and just go with the flow. He ordered wine for me and after a few drinks, we started flirting. Man, our texts were nothing compared to how direct he was in person. It was actually kind of nice to experience that with him. Back when my husband and I were dating, he used to flirt with me all the time. But once we got married, life got in the way and romance took a backseat. That night, though, flirting was front and center again and I loved every minute of it. I had a few drinks and ended up surprising myself by leaning in and kissing his cheek. Next thing I knew, we were sharing a passionate kiss and it was so thrilling. I never thought I'd be kissing someone in such a fancy setting. But then it hit me, what had I just done? I backed off, knowing full well what I was doing. I started feeling guilty for sneaking around behind my husband's back like that. He started comforting me, telling me I hadn't done anything wrong. His words made me emotional and I hugged him again. Then he invited me to his place. We both knew there was a mutual attraction between us. That night, we had an intimate moment. I pushed aside any thoughts of consequences and just enjoyed that brief moment of happiness. While I was still at my boss's place, my husband called. He told me he was going to the airport and would be back home in the evening. I responded saying I was excited for his return, but I quickly regretted my words. The truth was, we didn't feel the same way about each other anymore. Even if he didn't suspect anything before, he probably did now after our meeting. I left my boss's house reluctantly and got ready to go home, thinking it might have just been a one-time thing. I smiled at him to avoid any awkwardness and started heading towards the door. But he stopped me before I could leave and, So, he asked when we could hang out again, and I was a bit confused at first. But then he made it clear that he wanted to see me again because one night wasn't enough. I was happy that he wanted to see me, but I was also worried about my husband finding out. I talked to him about it and he promised to keep my husband in the dark. I trusted him because I really wanted to see him again. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't help myself. He said he would make plans and let me know. So, we kissed again before I left to go home. When I got back, my husband was already there. I had just finished cooking his favorite pasta and he seemed happy. He told me his work went well and he might even get a promotion. I was glad for him, but part of me couldn't help but wonder if he would ever treat me the way his boss did, even after a promotion. I was torn about what I was doing and started to question the decisions I was making. Was I making a mistake, or was I just taking advantage of a chance to have some fun and enjoy myself? Hey, so I was treating myself to some fancy stuff that I never got to do with my husband. Even though I had some doubts, I was determined to have a good time. I started sneaking around and meeting up with my husband's boss behind his back. He would text me where to meet him, and I'd show up while my husband was busy at work. The boss made sure to pile on the work for my husband so we could hang out more. I did feel a bit guilty for giving my husband more work because of my own selfish desires, but the boss reassured me that my husband loved his job. It was true that he'd rather be at work than with me, so I stopped feeling guilty and started enjoying these stolen moments. My husband's boss kept giving me expensive gifts, always knowing exactly what would make me happy. Sometimes he'd give me top-notch makeup and skincare products from famous brands, other times he'd take me on spontaneous shopping sprees at places like Dior, letting me pick out whatever I wanted. I loved the attention he gave me, and I couldn't remember the last time I felt this alive. I'm so happy. I made sure to stash all the gifts in the closet so my husband wouldn't find them. I had no good excuse if he did. My boss was taking care of all my needs, making sure I got whatever I wanted. I also made sure to keep things spicy in the bedroom to keep our relationship on track. My husband and I had stopped getting it on a long time ago, so he didn't suspect a thing when I started my affair. I thought maybe this could be my ticket to a perfect life. I stopped arguing with my husband because there was no point anymore. I was living the dream. Getting everything I wanted from my boss and everything was going great. I didn't mind when my husband was all about work, he stopped getting mad at me because I stopped nagging. It felt like the perfect life I always wanted. But then it all fell apart when I had to face reality and own up to my actions. One morning, while I was in the kitchen, my husband asked if I knew where his blue tie was. I had put it in the closet somewhere, but couldn't remember exactly where. He said he was looking for something in the closet, so I went back to making breakfast. But then I heard him coming downstairs with a fancy bag from a high-end brand. He asked me why there was a Dior scarf in my closet, and I was completely surprised by his question. I had totally forgotten that I had stashed my gifts in there. When I told him to look there, I panicked and made up a story, saying it belonged to a friend of mine. I said she had asked me to hold on to it because it was really expensive and she was moving houses. I didn't want the bag to get messed up or lost, so I convinced him to let me hold on to it. I promised to give it back and find his tie on my way back. I quickly checked to make sure he didn't find any other bags, but luckily it was just that one. I thought about moving the gifts to a different hiding spot later, but I totally forgot about it because I got busy with other stuff. One day, me and the boss were going to this fancy VIP event. He got invited and I was his plus one. I told my husband I was meeting up with someone. So, my friend needed a hand packing up for her move to a new place. I told her I might end up crashing there for the night since it could get late. She was cool with it and wished me luck. I threw on this amazing Chanel dress, still in shock that I could actually afford it now. A few months back, I could only dream of owning Chanel. The night was magical, with tons of paparazzi snapping pics. It was an art gallery opening with a famous artist and a bunch of other celebs. So, there were a bunch of photographers there, but I didn't really pay attention to them. I was just enjoying being around all those important people. It was a new experience for me. Later, I went with the boss to his place and stayed the night. The next day, I got back home around noon, thinking my husband would be at work. But, to my surprise, he was in the living room, all into his newspaper. I casually asked him why he wasn't at the office as I went to the kitchen to make myself some coffee. He just said that someone was waiting for me, which was weird, but I didn't think much of it. Then he asked me about my night, and I said it was good. I made up a story about helping a friend pack and stuff. As I finished my story, my husband walked into the kitchen looking mad. I couldn't figure out why, so I asked him what was up. He showed me the newspaper with a picture of me in his boss's arms from a party. The picture was small, but it was definitely me and him. I turned to my husband, ready to explain that it wasn't what it looked like, but the rage in his eyes shut me up. He found the bags I had stashed in the closet, and I forgot to take out the receipts. All those receipts were signed by his boss. I was in deep shit. My husband's anger kept growing, and he accused me of doing anything for fame and money. Then he asked me bluntly if I had slept with his boss. Tears filled my eyes, and there was no point in denying the truth, so I just nodded and cried. He looked hurt for a second, then coldly told me to. Once I left his place, he straight up said he never wanted to see my lying face again. I tried to go up to him for a hug and say sorry, but he just stepped back and crossed his arms. Then he stormed out, making it clear he wanted me gone by the time he got back. I was so desperate that I called up my buddy in Boston, hoping I could crash at his place for a bit. But some woman picked up the phone, and when I asked who she was, she dropped the bombshell that she's his fiancée. It was a total shocker, man. He made me think he was single and living on his own in the city. But then this woman on the phone knew exactly who I was, and she went off on me for messing around with her fiancé. Her words totally shocked me, and I just hung up. Now my husband has kicked me out of our place, and the place I thought I could go to is a mess. I feel completely lost. My husband and my boss both lied to me, and now I'm facing being homeless. I sat in my living room, determined to convince my husband to take me back. I thought that once he knew the whole story, if he can forgive me for what happened, maybe we can start fresh. I was waiting for him to come back, and when he did, his knuckles were all bloody. I asked him what happened, but he didn't say anything. He just looked at me angrily and asked why I was still there. I got the first aid kit and tried to help him, but when I touched his shoulder, he pushed me away. He started yelling at me, saying everything was messed up. He told me he had confronted his. So I went up to the boss and got in his face, and then he spilled the beans about his fiancée. He even had the nerve to mock me with sarcasm, saying the player got played, huh? He smirked and told me that his fiancée was living in Canada in a long-distance relationship with him. He darkly added that she would take him back, leaving me out in the cold. I asked why she could forgive him, but he couldn't forgive me. He just chuckled and said he wasn't as naive as her. Turns out, my husband had actually talked to his boss's fiancée, and he convinced her to forgive her man, knowing that if she did, he could break things off with me. He made it clear that he wasn't stupid and planned to end our relationship, but was leaving the option open for me to be with his boss. He looked through the bags and accused me of cheating on him. He laughed as my phone rang. It was his boss calling me. My husband told me to answer it. His boss told me that his fiancée had returned all the gifts and wanted me to bring them back to their place. I was shocked. But had no choice, so my husband just kept smirking at my situation. I headed to my closet and grabbed all the gifts his boss had given me. When I got back to the living room, my husband told me he had already spoken to a lawyer and that he was filing for divorce. I begged him for another chance, but he was cold and heartless. He called me the worst person ever and told me to get out of the house right then. I quickly packed a bag and left, crashing at a friend's place. My friend let me crash at her place for a few nights, but when her husband came back from his trip, she basically kicked me out because she thought I was getting too close to him. So I had to pack my bags and go crash at my parents' place. They were pretty pissed at me because my husband spilled the beans, but they let me stay for a bit. Then, my husband's lawyers hit me up about the divorce stuff. I tried looking for a job, but it was tough because I didn't have much experience because I got married right after college. And then, all of a sudden, I hit rock bottom in my life because of greed and desire, losing one of the most important relationships I've ever had. The divorce process started surprisingly quickly, only taking 3 months instead of the year I was anticipating. During that time, my husband barely talked to me, his lawyers did everything for him, while mine looked out for me. Unfortunately, the court didn't give me much alimony. The facts were, man, my husband and his legal team totally crushed it in court. My lawyers were no match, and I ended up losing everything: my husband, my marriage, and even my chance with my side piece. It was all my own fault. I couldn't blame my husband for how he reacted to my actions. It's been a year since my last post, and I've read all your comments. I know I messed up big time. I was young and dumb, thinking I was missing out on life by staying with my husband. I didn't appreciate how much effort and dedication he put into his work, but now I realize it. I'm working as a nanny now. Even though the pay isn't amazing, it's better than nothing. I've moved to a small apartment in a not-so-great part of town. I feel like I've lost all hope, and I've become the woman who messed up her marriage for fancy gifts. Everyone who knows what happened looks at me with disgust. I feel ashamed and guilty for what I did. On the other hand, my ex-husband is doing really well. He got a job promotion and now he's all dressed up in fancy suits, moving up the success ladder. I heard he's even dating a hot someone now. I'm really happy for him, even though I'm feeling sorry for myself. I could have been the one by his side, enjoying all the fancy stuff, if only I had the patience to stick by him during tough times. He definitely deserves all the success he's getting, while I feel like I deserve the pain and shame I go through every day. Thanks for listening so far. Can you believe the nerve of this guy? Man, that woman is a total mess. She got hitched right after college to some dude working his butt off in a boring office job. And what does she do? Spends all day on Instagram, feeling envious of her friends' seemingly perfect lives. Talk about having messed up priorities. Her poor husband is out there hustling while she's at home sulking because she's not living some Instagram dream. She even had the audacity to whine about their modest living situation. Seriously, priorities, lady. Girl, let me tell you, not everyone begins their marriage living in a fancy mansion. But get this, it gets even crazier. She goes and falls for the oldest trick in the book, getting all charmed by her husband's boss at a party. Like, seriously, the guy gives her one compliment and she's all googly-eyed. And don't even get me started on how she conveniently forgets to mention the expensive LV bag her husband's boss bought her. Oh, and she straight up lies about how much it cost, saying she found it at a thrift store. Like, does it get any better or worse than this? She ends up having an affair with the boss. Man, can you believe it? While her husband is out busting his butt at work, the nerve of his wife and her boss. He's a real piece of work too, buying her gifts, taking her to fancy events, and get this, he was already engaged the whole time. Talk about a drama-filled soap opera. Honestly, this whole situation is a prime example of what not to do in a marriage. It's like watching a train wreck in slow motion. You can't look away, but you know it's not going to end well. She thought she wanted the high life, but ended up with nothing. It's a story of greed, betrayal, and a whole lot of poor decisions. Man, there are so many choices, it's insane.